Hello, and welcome back to our special edition of Literary Movements. This time we have some special guests who will share with us some important information regarding this topic. Now, it is time to talk about Surrealism. But what exactly is Surrealism? Well, Surrealism is an artistic and literary movement emerged in France. It tried to capture by means of symbolic, abstract, or figurative forms the images of the deepest reality of the human being. It actually explored the subconscious and the world of dreams through the creation of visual art and poetry. Surrealism's main influence was Dadaism, which, since before the First World War, produced works of anti-art. However, the emphasis of Surrealism was not on the negation of art, as was the case of Dadaism, but on the construction of a positive expression of it. In fact, Surrealism is often considered neither normal nor natural. The Surrealists sought to channel the unconscious as a means to unlock the power of the imagination.
Disdaining rationalism and literary realism and powerfully influenced by psychoanalysis, the Surrealists believed the rational mind represented the power of imagination, weighing it down with taboos. Influenced also by Karl Marx, they hoped that the psyche had the power to reveal the contradictions in the everyday world and spur on revolution. The most immediate influence for several of the Surrealists was Giorgio di Circo. Their contemporary, who like them, used bizarre imagery with unusual juxtapositions. They were also drawn to artists from the recent past who were interested in primitivism, the naive, or fantastical imaginary, such as Gustave Moreau, Arnold Brocklin, Odilon Rendon, and Henri Rousseau. Even artists from as far back as the Renaissance, such as Giuseppe Arcimboldo and Hieronymus Bosch, improved inspiration insofar as these artists were not overly concerned with aesthetic issues involving line and color, but instead felt compelled to create what Surrealists thought as a real.
Some other contributors were Remedios Varo, Federico García Lorca, Louis Aragon, Philippe Soupault, and André Breton, the French poet who founded the movement in Paris in 1924.
Now we're gonna talk about the historical period and context of Surrealism. The Surrealist movement started in Europe in the 1920s after the First World War, and it has its nucleus in Paris. Surrealism has its roots in the Dada movement, or as it is mainly known, Dadaism. But Surrealism was less violent and more artistically based, and it was led by André Breton, a French doctor who had fought in the trenches during the First World War. The Surrealist movement emerged from a necessity of protest about the magnitude of war consequences, and they were guided principally by the philosophies of Sigmund Freud, especially the one with the unconscious mind. In the interpretation of dreams, Freud explains that people, for example the soldiers, had a lot of repercussions for his time in the trenches and the importance of inner thoughts and repressed desires and memories of violence. We can see this in André Breton's work, as he was a soldier during the Great War, as I said before, but we'll talk about some examples later.
Answering the question of what Surrealism means to the British, the writer David Gascoigne concluded that the British were as scared of Surrealism as they were of sex. I actually believe that Surrealism in Britain sat at the heart of a web of assorted radical activity of psychoanalysis, anti-fascism, avant-garde, poetry, the pioneering sociology of mass observation, experimental cinema, pranks. Even a simple spidergram laying out all of the connections would be handy. I believe that Britain was Surrealism's original native land. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, William Blake, the Gothic novel, Gulliver's Travels, and so much more. Perhaps they didn't need the whole movement and manifesto, but it produced, slightly by accident, a group of very interesting pictures that ought to have a wider showing.
Art history has often framed the women surrealists as muses and partners to their male counterparts, as opposed to artists in their own right. That's why, today, I have chosen to talk about a female painter, Emma Bridgewater. Emma Frith Bridgewater, born in 1906, was an English artist and poet associated with the Surrealist movement. She was better known as Emmy Bridgewater. Based at times in both Birmingham and London, she was a significant member of the Birmingham Surrealists, who were an informal group of artists and intellectuals, and of the London-based British Surrealist group, involved in the organization of the International Surrealist Exhibition in London in 1936. She served as an important link between the two cities and the two sometimes rival artistic groups. In 1947, Bridgewater was one of the 6 English artists chosen by André Breton to exhibit at the Exposition Internationale du Surrealisme at the Galerie Met in Paris, the last major international surrealist group exhibition. Talking specifically about her art, Amy Bridgewater's work in the 1930s and 1940s largely consisted of paintings and pen and ink drawings. Her personal iconography often featured organic imagery such as birds, eggs, leaves, fruit, and tendril-like automatized lines depicted with a sense of surrealist black humor and violence, often within a dreamlike landscape. Then, from the 1970s onwards, she also worked in college. One of her most significant paintings, Night Work is About to Commence, belongs to the collection at Birmingham Museums. In this richly painted image, a dark raven appears in an indeterminate landscape of unusual forms. Her rapidly painted works have a spontaneous and urgent quality, as she tried to record the fleeting sensations and imagery of the subconscious. Finally, the obituary The Independent wrote in March 13, 1999, the day she passed away, her paintings show an ability to enter a personal dream world and transform the visions she experienced there into bold, unself-conscious, emotionally charged landscapes, which more often than not strike into the very depths of one's mind. Using a limited palette and paintings thickly, she was able to bring together seemingly unrelated objects, which she used to fill desolating landscapes, giving the paintings a narrative quality of her own making. For Britain, Surrealism was born between World War I and World War II, and it was a movement in visual art and literature. Its main objective was to unite the conscious and unconscious in the creation of art. Apparently, it was a local phenomenon between the 1930s and the 1940s, as it was limited to main cities such as London and Birmingham. One of the most important figures that influenced British Surrealism was David Gascoigne, as he emphasized the native sources of the movement. He wrote the first English Surrealist Manifesto and a short survey of Surrealism. Even though the first English Surrealist Manifesto was published in French, his work became one of the most important texts for British Surrealism. He decided to publish it in French because he intended to create a bond or relationship between London-centered artists and emerging French surrealists, most of whom he met at the Atelier 17, a Parisian studio owned by English printmaker and painter Stanley William Hayter. He became officially part of the English branch of the movement when he met Roland Penrose. David Gascoigne was born on October 10, 1916. He was an English poet, and he published his first work, Roman Balcony, when he was 16 years old in 1932. Gascoigne helped curate the London International Surrealist Exhibition in 1936 and broadcast from Barcelona for the Republican side during the Spanish Civil War. David Gascoigne's classic text, A Short Survey of Surrealism, was published in 1935, and it was the first comprehensive work on surrealism to be published in English. Gascoigne's membership of the Surrealist movement and his association with its leading members placed him in an ideal position to witness and record the development and significance of its most important artists and writers. A short survey of Surrealism is not merely a history of the birth and growth of the movement, but also a thorough analysis of the main ideas associated with it.
Let me mention some other facts about this author. He studied in Salisbury Cathedral School and Regent Street Polytechnic. Being just a teenager, he didn't only write Roman Balcony, but he also brought out his novel Opening Day. Both books are remarkable achievements for an adolescent, and they were followed by the equally striking poetry collections Man's Life Is This Meat in 1936 and Hölderlin's Madness in 1938, which established his reputation as one of the most original voices in the 1930s. He consolidated his reputation with A Background and Other Poems in 1950 and with Night Thoughts in 1956. He died the 25th of November 2001, aged 85, in Isle of Wight.
And there you have it. Surrealism can be as complex as us, human beings. Thank you so much to our special guests, and thank you for staying with us in this special edition of Literary Movement, Surrealism. If you have any doubts or comments, you can share them with us by sending an email. Until next time, bye!